Hi, everyone. Welcome back to the No Mustard Podcast. This podcast is brought to you from the purchase of my magazines and art by viewers like you. You can learn more about my work or subscribe to the Fast Food Legend newsletter by visiting fastfoodlegend.com. I'd like to introduce my guest this week, KC Hysmith, a food writer, food scholar, recipe developer, and food historian whose work explores the intersections of food, gender, technology, and digital media. She holds a PhD in American Studies from the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill, and her writing has appeared in the Washington Post, Eater, Food 52, Gastronomica, the Boston Globe, and many other publications. KC is also the co-author and editor of several acclaimed books, including When Southern Women Cook, the Saltbox Seafood Joint Cookbook, Edible North Carolina, A Journey Across a State of Flavor, and an American Girl Anthology. Through her writing and historical research, she uncovers the stories behind recipes, cookbooks, and food traditions, revealing how they shape culture, identity, and the way we understand the past. Welcome, KC. Thanks for joining us today.
Thank you for having me here.
So today, we are going to take advantage of your expertise, and I sincerely appreciate you taking the time to help us solve some of these mysteries of the Costco food court.
Absolutely.
I'm going to show you a picture, and we'll talk about it. And let me just open up the first image. Let me know that you can see it, please.
Yes.
Okay. So this is Costco pizza. Tell me about it.
I have only had it once in my life. It's very cheesy. It's very intense, I think, and but I know it has a cult following of sorts. Maybe not as much as some of the other foods that they sell, but I wasn't disappointed, but it did give cafeteria pizza vibes.
So I have some questions about it that I'm hoping that you can answer. And these are cultural questions, and some food history, but more cultural.
Mm-hmm.
We know it's Costco pizza just by looking at it. No other slice of pizza looks like this.
Mm-hmm.
And as you said, it gives cafeteria vibes. One of the things that I wonder about Costco food in general that I'd like to discuss over the course of this interview is a lot of it, when you really objectively look at it, it's not good, and it's very unique. And I wonder how much of the cult following that this food has just comes from the 30 some odd years of it proliferating through our culture, through people growing up with it, as like a treat. The parents take them to Costco, and then they get this treat at the end, things like that people almost convince themselves that it's good. What do you think about that kind of thing?
I think you're absolutely spot on. It's produced in-house. I think a lot of the way things look at Costco are because that they produce them in-house. Not necessarily, and I should clarify, that doesn't mean that they're made fresh back behind the counter. It means that they're made for Costco in a very specific way, and with specific cost-saving measures. And so you've got the kind of telltale look, and then they are reheated or recooked, or prepared kind of behind those spaces. So that's what gives me the telltale, it's been put under the salamander broiler where it goes down the line to kind of get reheated, that a lot of fast food restaurants use. So it's not that bespoke to them, but kind of all the different amalgamation makes it theirs. But I think the cultural kind of intrigue is partially this nostalgia, but partially because it's remained so cheap after all these years. They've made a really big point to keep their prices, at least in this section of the store, fairly low, if not absurdly low at times. It makes very little sense that there's no way they make some of these foods for what they're asking people to pay for them. They're definitely losing money in some regard. Yet people flock to have these things. So they remain a cult obsession, as I already said.
A couple things I'd like to look at in a little bit more detail and just get your thoughts on. I don't know if you know the answers or not. I certainly don't, which is why I'm asking you, but I thought maybe you might have some insight to these little mysteries. One, after all these years, they still serve the slices of pizza on plates that are too small for them, as you can see in the image. I don't know if that's intentional, or being that these foods are so thoroughly designed before they're produced? That would be my first question for you. What do you think that's intentionally to make it look like they're getting more for their money, or is there something else to it?
I would imagine that that's exactly it, that it is a psychological approach, fuller plate, smaller plate. It could also just be they have one plate for all the different things, and it sometimes fits one thing and not necessarily the other, and a cost saving measure, as we've already discussed, could be that it's just they have the one plate. But that is also part of it, and it's quite flimsy too. It's not, it's almost like a little taco for the pizza that you hold it with, because it falls apart quite quickly under the heaviness of the pizza.
Where else in American food history do we see this concept that I constantly refer to on my channel as it's not very good, but there's a lot of it?
We see this all over America. This is, I think, one of the biggest through lines of American foodways, and it's something that we see kind of in all pockets of America as well. This is not like unique to the South or the North. I would imagine people might have their own regional feelings about that if they are from one of those areas, to have, kind of disparaging things to say about the other regions. But I see this across all regions and largely across most of American history. And we see in American food history too, it's a discussion of plenty and abundance, not necessarily quality. And you have plenty of people, farmers, food experts throughout history push back on that diet, that it shouldn't be black and white. But nonetheless, we have increasingly shown through our fast casual restaurants, excuse me, through the very existence of Costco itself, that more is more, and that's sometimes all people really want.
What are the origins of that? Certainly during the Great Depression would have been the opposite of that. So where do we see after that, or after World War II, or do you have any knowledge of what the history of that abundance marketing, where it started and what the idea was?
I think it started, it's not one exact pinpointed thing. I think the Great Depression is a great thing to point out. It's definitely impacted the way that people's physical bodies have reacted to food. We still have people who maybe grew up in the Great Depression or remembered it as a young child, or whose parents maybe were alive then, and so they carried over kind of feelings, which directly impacted the way that they put food on the table as that child was growing up, and so they've carried those habits. So we have some very like psychological, social, emotional kind of ramifications from that. But historically, we also have, shortly after that, after the First World War, we have a post-war consumer boom with far more packaged items. We have the birth of the grocery store and the supermarket, or the grocery store that we know today, the supermarket. Then we hurdle fast forward to Costco and all these other kinds of shopping experiences, including online. But even early on, like before the war, but I think post-war is a really good starting point for kind of our current iteration of things. You have consumer choice, and you have lots of consumers trying to fight one another over shelf space. And so they're going to figure out ways to incentivize you to buy their product. And one of those ways is by saying, well, we have this much more in our product for this same amount of money. And so it became, a little bit about quality and a little bit about cost, but it really became this very big optics thing, how much more you could get, how big of a container you could get. And then coupled with that, we also have the boom in suburban living and car-centric society, where people were no longer taking their little grocery bag and walking to the grocery store. They were driving to the grocery store. And so they now had even more space for food. And then the fridges got bigger because the houses were bigger. And the families were maybe not bigger, but the possibilities were bigger in our newer homes. And so just the need to store food, or the ability to store food, became larger. And so you could, of course, have a bigger block of cheese or more cuts of meat, or and this expanded into the pantry too, more flour, whatever. And our couple that also with technology to keep food nicer for longer, whether that's in packages in the pantry, or in ice boxes, now refrigerators, what have you. There were so many different variables kind of happening around the same time, especially in the post-war era, that contributed to Americans just wanting more and more. And then the consumer market was prepared to give it to them.
I have two more questions about the slice of pizza. The first is, when we talk about robotics in the kitchen, most people that I've encountered when I talk to them don't like the idea of robots in the kitchen, robots taking food service jobs, that kind of thing. However, this Costco pizza has largely been made by machine for over 2 decades now, and it doesn't get that kind of pushback, and I wonder why.
Yeah, I actually didn't realize it was largely made by machines. I'm not surprised. But I think there's also, you have, and I'll admit I am an anti-robot person, taking human jobs person. I veer more towards the jobs that are that all labor is skilled labor, I will say, but the jobs that necessarily are not as rote or not as monotonous kind of thing. There are definitely places for robots. But I think if I had to guess, I would say it probably doesn't get the same pushback. A, because maybe not as many people know. B, because it's a food for the lower classes. It's a food that's at a discount grocery store that you don't hear the same kind of influencers talking about in the same way as like an Erewhon. It's still talked about, but in a very different way than a fancier grocery store. And so it's okay because it's not this elevated food. It's not perceived as fancy or elevated. So it's okay that a robot's making it for the masses. There's kind of this class divide. I assume that's probably a big reason why people are not reacting the same way about it.
Okay, and now I'd like to ask you probably the most important question about Costco pizza that I can't figure out, and maybe you have some insight into. It's the only I'm from New York City originally. I've had pizza all over the world, as I'm sure you have as well. It's the only place where I've ever seen slices of pizza handled with tongs. And I don't know what the origin of that is, why that is, what that is. Anything you know where you can think about why they use tongs to handle the pizza.
Yeah, I realize I've not paid attention. I've only been to Costco. I feel like I should admit at this point that I have only been to Costco less than a half dozen times. I don't have a membership there. I always go with an anthropological eye, with a friend who's there just doing their shopping. And then I get overwhelmed by everything that's there. And so I didn't realize they use tongs. My best guess is it's either a weird West Coast thing. Maybe that's like how, since Costco originated in Seattle, but I can't imagine, I can't think of any West Coast pizza I've had that also uses tongs. I think the best bet is just it's an easy tool. It's hard to mess up, because you've got like a pincher versus like a slide where like a spatula where it could fall off. So you can have people who are maybe not as familiar with working in the kitchen just grab the pizza, and that it leaves little room for error, basically. And the worst that's going to happen is
I feel like it would leave more room for error.
You think more room? I'm just trying to think, like,
Yeah.
if the tongs like could grab it. I just feel like there's so many instances of things falling off spatulas.
I didn't know if there was more of a cultural reason where Americans use the inappropriate tools for the job in any kind of way or anything like that, because it's such a weird thing and I notice it every time, as I have for decades, and it just bothers me, and I was just thought maybe you had some idea beyond
No,
that.
it would bother me too. Now that I know it, I'm gonna have to observe more. I I think you're right though. It is like it's someone said we're using tongs in this kitchen. Someone made that executive decision, potentially the founders years ago. And it just stuck and no one spoke up. And the kitchen labor that's working in the folks working in the kitchens there are likely not, highly trained in the culinary arts at all and are potentially the same people out, they take shifts, maybe they work in the kitchen, maybe they also stock shelves. And why would they complain about tongs being a weird choice? It's above their pay grade. Um, and yeah, so tongs it is, and tongs it has remained. So
Let's move on to the next item. And the next two items we're going to look at are actually quite similar. This is the Costco calzone. What can you tell me about it?
it doesn't look like a calzone to me. I have never had this, but I have heard that it wasn't as well received as other things. It very much looks like they smushed the pizza onto itself and just kind of like threw some parm on top and called it, threw it in the thing and called it a day. I don't know much else besides that.
Well, here's the thing that my feeling about it, and you tell me historically what you know that might uh, justify my belief or dispel my belief. Obviously, it doesn't look like a calzone. I'm sure it doesn't taste like a calzone. Um, and this is one of the largest companies in the world that sells food, so certainly they should know what a calzone looks and tastes like, right?
Presumably.
And is composed of. My sense is that they wanted to make it as white American palatable as possible. And so it's really sort of a jacked up hot pocket,
Hmm.
which in its own way is a very watered down white American interpretation of what a calzone would have been. How do you feel about that?
I think that's spot on. I can't help to but notice the fork and the knife over here in the side of the picture that will inevitably break on that very tough crust. And when you're trying to eat it, I think oversized hot pocket is excuse me. I think oversized hot pocket is spot on. And it very well could have existed as kind of a frozen entity before it got reheated, much like a hot pocket.
Why is it that large portions of American culture cannot handle the palate, or it's believed would not handle the palate, of a regular calzone?
I think so. For a long time, there is this assumption, and you see this trend on the internet too, with people saying, especially white people, can't handle spice. And there's some really cool historical background for this. One is that we partially built this country, or this country was partially. I'm not going to take credit. The country was partially built on spice trade, much like any other kind of European colony. And one of the original spice ports was in Salem, Massachusetts. Actually, it was well known for its
Wow.
spice imports, along with witchcraft. Um, and so the New England area basically was known for bringing in all sorts of spices, and they were used heavily in colonial food, and spices that we more often think of as or sweet spices, so clove and allspice and cinnamon and nutmeg, were used across the spectrum in terms of food, sweet and savory. So food used to be far more heavily spiced, maybe not hot spiced, but flavored spiced. And then over time, those fell out of favor. There was various pushes in the 19th century in the temperance movement and even the suffrage movement to specifically get white women to not have spiced food because it was not pure, it was bad for the body. There's all sorts of sexist and racist kind of things brought into that. So there was a push for kind of medicinal reasons, medicinal with heavy quotations, to for white people to not consume spices, including black pepper. Salt was excluded. Salt didn't count in any of this. Salt was a preservative. Sugar was a preservative. All these other things didn't necessarily have to be there. And so you have this kind of amalgamation of this old history, but also these kind of new scientific notions of moving away from things, the purest food. We see some of that happening again today, that all really just have kind of racist origins. And so our palate largely changed despite the access to the spices, despite access to more and more flavors as different immigrant groups come into the country. And so you have this kind of foundation that was built and lasted for a long time. And of course, you have pockets of regionality across the nation where people do handle it. But that meant our standard American fare, the standard American diet, and the things that were sold in the grocery stores, for the large part, like Hot Pockets and things like that, were not flavored heavily with anything except probably salt and sugar. And so Costco's just kind of building upon that tradition.
That's amazing. Also, we cannot mention Salem, Massachusetts without sending a shout out to everybody at the Dairy Witch in Salem, Massachusetts. Hi, everyone at the Dairy Witch. We love the Dairy Witch.
It's a good one.
Okay, let's open the next image, this is going to be very similar, but it's a little bit weirder. This is the Costco chicken bake. Tell me about it.
So from what I understand, this is also something I've not had, but from what I understand, it is also like a Hot Pocket, mixed with kind of a chicken cordon bleu type thing with like the breading, and somewhere in between. And I honestly don't remember what's all inside of it, but some kind of pot pie-ish type filling, chicken, some veggie, some kind of sauce that binds it all together. But it's still just giving Hot Pocket. With maybe some more protein involved.
To me, it's almost like if you look at the menu plan here, it's extremely schizophrenic, right? And I don't understand the logic of putting something like this on this menu, and I also don't understand the consumer choice of this item. It's extremely popular, so I'm in the minority here. I do see a lot of hacks where people will take a Costco hot dog, cut this chicken bake open, and use it as the bun for the hot dog, which I can't imagine tastes good. But I don't really understand the concept of a chicken bake, and I don't know where else in the country I would see a chicken bake. I can't think of anywhere that I've seen one. What can you tell me about the origins of this kind of dish?
Yeah, thinking about what a chicken bake is, which is basically some kind of meat pie, right? In some kind of dough, not dissimilar to a calzone, but has a different kind of origin story. Excuse me. I think, we do have a tradition of meat pies in the country, just in terms of our European colonial kind of origins. Meat pies would have been absolutely a thing that was brought over with a hot water pastry crust, which makes it it's like a harder crust if you've ever had like a empanada or a pasty versus, like a flaky apple turnover. Those are kind of like two different doughs. So it definitely has an origin story. But obviously I think it would look very different than what our colonial forefathers and foremothers would have been making. I think it has a very similar kind of industrial, easy to mass produce, easy. It's going to be freezer friendly, meaning like it's not shelf stable, but it's freezer stable. It'll last in the freezer. It'll last in whatever cold storage they have until someone orders, until that day comes when they need to throw a bunch in the fryer or wherever they make it. And it's got this handheld capability. I think I agree with you that it feels very schizophrenic. But at the same time, every single one of these foods so far have been handhelds. And so I think that's a huge part of American food in general as well. And something we don't see in other parts of the world is Americans rarely eat seated anymore. There's lots of fast food culture, car culture. So much fast food here is tied with drive-throughs to the point where some fast food restaurants at least where I'm at in the South, no longer have walk up or inside entries. It's just a drive through. And so, you have this on this go mentality and you're already on the go grocery shopping. And so it's whatever they can make that's going to be handheld and able to you take out to your car. I know there is a seating area at Costco, but I think that's a gesture.
Let's have a look at the next item. This is another mystery, I'm telling you. You have a slice of pizza, you have a calzone, you have a chicken bake, and then somebody said, you know what we really need is a hot turkey and provolone sandwich. And I do not understand this at all. And it's on ciabatta, on a square ciabatta. I don't understand this at all. I can't honestly say, and I am quite overweight, I cannot honestly say that I have ever craved, ordered, thought about a turkey and provolone sandwich on a ciabatta unless I was trapped in an airport and there was no other option. Tell me all about it.
And I see some like what I think are red onions, like kind of peeking out there.
I think it has an onions on it, yeah.
Okay.
I think so.
Do we know if this item is a nationwide thing or is this
nationwide?
Unique? Okay. Because I know, excuse me, this food is choking me up. I know they did have some regional differences in certain things, maybe test markets. I'm not sure. This feels like I'm curious when this came out, but it feels like a response to either A, healthier eating habits that were kind of pushed in the early aughts with like the Obama era kind of like push for leaner choices and things like that. And this was, I mean, not altogether a miss. Those are all fairly like okay, like nutritionally dense options and still a portable-ish, seems very messy, but portable-ish option. It feels, like focused more on the protein and technically like there's lots of arguments I feel like people and we as Americans and we as humans make with ourselves about bread and carbs and things like that. So I could see someone arguing that this is less carbs. This reminds me of a sandwich that Starbucks started selling in I want to say the 2010s that was also like a little tiny ciabatta square with turkey bacon and some kind of cheese, some kind of white cheese that looked healthier. And I think that's it. and it also was like billed as like the healthier breakfast on the go that you could get with your coffee that, had 1,000 grams of sugar in it. And so I think, I don't know for sure, but I would bet that this came out in that era and is a response to some of those things.
And how did the ciabatta trend start? Because I would say up until I was 30, I'd never even heard of ciabatta.
Well, yeah, ciabatta was a very big part of kind of like the Tuscan kitchen era in the early aughts and 2010s. When kitchens were, all the rage was to have a Tuscan styled kitchen in these like lovely warm hues, and you'd have jars of olive oil and pickled vegetables you never actually ate. My mom was a Tuscan kitchen mom. So I grew up in this exact era. And, it was the era of Chef Emeril on Food Network, who was not Italian, but like he was American Italian, but he gave that vibe. And he cooked a lot of that. You had Giada De Laurentiis on the Food Network that was bringing in all these Italian, Marcella Hazan. You had all these kind of Italian-American agents of cultural change that kind of brought in these different elements. And ciabatta is, not a bad bread, but it was a very accessible bread, I think. And one that was different than so many other breads that we had already brought over. Or had kind of integrated into American foodways. We already had French bread and we already had, Americanized that, made it fluffy and soft, but still looked like a baguette, just oversized. And so ciabatta was just a different one. And I remember the first time I had ciabatta and as a young person, and I thought it was really cool and very different. And then ciabatta was everywhere. And it's kind of stuck around, clearly.
Yeah, I'm surprised how much it stuck around because I remember when the New York Islanders changed their hot dog buns to ciabatta buns, and I was not enthralled about it, and they've really stuck at sporting events and everywhere else. I don't understand why it hasn't gone away.
Yeah, I don't, and I don't think it's a particularly hard bread to make. I think it's, if you are someone who enjoys a sandwich, you know that it works for certain foods and not others. Like it's a heartier bread and it stands up to being held and on the go. So I could see the choice there, but I really don't feel like that's the choice. I think it was that it was trending and it was part of this larger cultural zeitgeist and they were jumping on that. And potentially I could see this being the healthy mom option. Like the kids
So
order
this
the hot
really
dogs.
this really dates back to all the Food Network mania.
I would argue,
Um,
yeah.
is more or less okay. That makes sense. That makes sense. Let's look at the Costco hot dog, probably the most popular item on the Costco food court menu. Much like the pizza, I have some very basic questions that nobody ever seems to ask. Um, the first one being this: where else do you see a seeded hot dog bun?
I was thinking about that in advance of this call, and I cannot think of where else you see it. You see like is poppy seeds on a Chicago hot dog, right?
Yes,
Chicago,
that would be right. Yep,
yeah.
yep.
And
Yeah,
so
Portillo's dog would have poppy seeds. That's 100% correct. Yeah.
so you see seeded dogs seeded general, but not necessarily a sesame seed, which I feel like in America we associate very, very much so, largely, I think, through very targeted marketing by fast food burger restaurants as a burger bun.
Yeah, yeah.
So, yeah, I'm not entirely, I don't think I know of a single other place where it exists.
What would generally be the benefit of it, or the if you could step back and imagine the person creating this, why they would have done this? Do you have any thoughts culturally where that would have come from, or
I think it could have come from the fact that they, when they ate at restaurants, they liked a seeded bun and wanted to make that part of the Costco culture. I could see it also being a clever um, marketing kind of ploy, like it didn't they don't Costco notoriously does not take out any marketing. Like they don't advertise, they don't do any marketing. So every choice that they have to make in store is their opportunity for marketing, is their opportunity for word of mouth marketing as well. And so I could see this being like, we're going to make our hot dog buns different and we're going to put sesame seeds on it because it's not, it definitely adds an extra step. It definitely adds money, but maybe when the choice was first made, it wasn't that big of a deal. I'm curious to know like how they feel about that now in the world of tariffs where sesame seeds are almost all imported. But yeah, I could see it very much being a choice to deliberately like put yourself apart from competition, in addition to the fact that hot dogs they only charge $1.50.
the other thing that's very strange about the Costco hot dog, that I specifically picked this picture that I found of the dog, is the way that they are packaged in a paper bag like this. You don't see this anywhere else, and especially not a brown paper bag. Occasionally you might see a white wax paper sleeve, but this is a very weird choice. Any thoughts on the packaging?
I've always thought that the packaging reminds me of like when you buy a bottle of liquor and they put it in a
Hmm.
brown paper bag and it's like to cover your shame. Um, it's like like a faded element of the blue laws in various places because I think that's something that happens across the nation, but obviously is enforced in different ways. This feels very similar to that. It feels like here's your oversized hot dog. And you didn't pay that much for it, so there's no telling what the quality actually is. And it's already a hot dog, so you're already starting with remnant meat pieces. No judgment. Everyone eats what I love a hot dog. And then so you can cover that shame by putting it in this giant paper bag that's oversized. I can't imagine any other reason why you would package it in this way. I recognize that the hot dogs that they use are oversized, and so they would maybe not fit in your standard white waxed paper bag, or, you know, the other kind of elements that exist out there already for hot dogs. So maybe they were like, well, we can't find anything for it. Let's just use a giant paper bag.
Well, also that bun is quite oversized. You never see a hot dog bun this size. If you were to get like a foot-long hot dog, it would come in a regular hot dog bun that was just longer.
Yeah.
And here you're really getting somewhere between a hot dog bun and a submarine sandwich roll.
Yeah. And that could be the other thing, is that they did see something, you know, they did see sandwich rolls that had the sesame seeds, like a hoagie, or, you know, whatever you call it in your area. And they were like, let's split the difference and just make them slightly smaller, but still too big. There's some very clever thinking through this. I feel like it's all very intentional, but it very much could have also been, you know, they do so much in-house, so much of their process has, from the get-go, was done in-house and has become increasingly in-house. I know that their hot dogs were once upon a time kosher, but they became too expensive to buy from the other place, so they started making them in-house, and they were no longer kosher. And it could be that whatever they can achieve in-house is, you know, got bigger guardrails than doesn't give them the option to kind of make the bun the right size, make the bag the right size, and they're just operating on such low costs. They just keep going forward.
Are there any other examples in food history in America of a retailer or a restaurant or anything like that that's done something similar, where they've sort of modified the base, I don't want to say ingredient, but components of a traditional food that's very unique to just what they do, so that just by looking at it, you know where it's come from?
Yeah, I think one really cool example, or not cool, just one good example from kind of similar territory is Wendy's has the square patties, which weird me out, I'll be honest, because that's just such a weird, it's a weird shape for a patty. So yeah, Wendy's is known by its square patties, which is a very unique thing to them, and they talk about it. They are really proud of that. It's like how you know it's a Wendy's burger. Let's see. I'm sure there's others out there, but that's the one that's kind of sticking in my brain right now. But it's definitely something that I think, even if they don't achieve it, even if something is not successful, it is absolutely something that these kinds of companies, these very consumer focused, that really rely on consumers paying attention or rather not paying attention and just picking up on these small details that, you know, kind of stick in their brain almost subconsciously. It's something that they're all thinking about, all fast food chains, all CPG marketing folks. It's something that they're talking about.
Okay. Let's look at the next item. This is another very strange item to me, and you're going to tell me all about the history of it, I'm sure. This is called the Costco Cold Brew Mocha Freeze. What is that?
So the mocha freeze, so the one on the right is a latte freeze, and the one on the left is the mocha freeze, because mocha is chocolate, right? When it's involved with coffee. I think it's Costco's answer to a Frappuccino. And then the one on the right is a mocha frappuccino. I mean, the left is the mocha frappuccino. And from what I understand, it's literally just the same thing with just chocolate sauce on the inside. There's really no other difference. I can't remember exactly when these came out as well, but I want to say they came out kind of, again, as an answer to the Starbucks, kind of Starbucksification of the nation. In the late aughts, early 2010s, and, you know, when Frappuccinos were all the rage, and the kind of going to Starbucks as part of your errands. You know, you'd go to Starbucks before you got to Costco, so you could walk around with your drink, and then, you know, you'd buy in whatever way you buy. And, you know, there's a well-known, I'm assured I feel fairly certain there's some science behind it. That's just not my realm of, you know, you go to the grocery store hungry, you're going to buy more things. So maybe this is Costco's way of A, dealing with the Starbucks of it all, and B, if someone buys Starbucks and brings it to the store, they're no longer as famished. So now they come to the store and maybe they wait to get this at the end, and maybe they buy a few more snacks because they're hungry. And then they grab their little coffee treat at the end, maybe one of those little turkey provolone sandwiches similar to the Starbucks offerings. And now Costco has all of the has it all. They've taken all of that consumer's potential spending for the day. But yeah, it's the answer. It's the answer to that. It's I've never had one of these either, but they look quite slushy and sweet.
You said something very interesting there that's very foreign to me, and I wonder if you could explain it a little bit better, or the history of it a little bit better, which is the concept of the ritual of stopping at the Starbucks before you go to the Costco. Tell me about that.
Yeah. So again, this is, I think, part of our, uniquely American culture of car cultures and driving everywhere. And the fact that, coupled with the fact that our grocery shopping, people in the United States on the large part are not shopping every day or every couple of days for the most part. They are shopping for the week or shopping for the month. That is supported by the fact that, maybe they don't live right next to a grocery store that's in walking or biking distance. Or they have to drive to it. It's maybe in the other part of town, or if they live more rural, it's in town, coupled with giant fridges and giant pantries. And so, it can support that. You can go to Costco and then you can fit all the things you buy there in your house, in your garage, in your second fridge. And so grocery shopping is not a quick, I need a loaf of bread and a gallon of milk. It's an ordeal. It's a big thing. So there is a mentality I have observed of people needing to, what I think feels akin to carbo loading. They need to prep for this endeavor. And if you've ever shopped at Costco, which it sounds like you have, it's an endeavor. You have to have your ID out. You have to, they only have the big carts, which I'm a very short person. I always go for a small cart. And so the big carts are overwhelming. So you're pushing that giant cart, you're having to haul giant things off the shelf. It's a stamina, it requires stamina. And so I could see, Starbucks before Costco, or really anything. And it becomes a habit, right? Caffeine is addictive. And so if you are used to getting your Starbucks, your Starbies, as people say now, before going to Costco or whatever, big grocery of your choice, it becomes something you do every time. And it becomes a ritual. And sometimes it's with, if you're a parent, most likely a mom with small children, you also need that caffeine kick, and you can get the kids their little non-caffeinated whatever and their cake pops, and it's a way to get the children out of the house. So it's also got some it's incentivizing the self and whatever additional people you might have in tow. And then you take on the gauntlet that is the Costco.
That is such an interesting perspective that I had not considered. Thank you. Let's have a look at the next item, which is the Costco strawberry banana smoothie. Tell me about
that. Looks like, to me, more like a slushie. It looks like it has no dairy in it, which could be a cost-saving measure, but also opening up the field for consumers who are not consuming dairy. It very much looks like something you'd get out of a margarita dispenser, like a slushie, the ones that go around and around. Yeah, again, I feel like this is one of their later editions. I know it was a later edition. I don't know the exact date of this one either, but I feel like it was probably something that came about in response to all you have is hot dogs and pizza, and I need something that's not those things.
Well, I'm also thinking about, in the sort of time frame that you were talking about, the Starbucks Frappuccino mania, that it was responding to. We also had a Jamba Juice mania at that time, and I wonder if this is a response to the Jamba Juice. And I guess part of the mystery of it to me is that these things have stuck around at the Costco food court long after the trends that they are competing with have faded.
Yeah, I think you're spot on with the Jamba Juice. I completely forgot about Jamba Juice. And Jamba Juice definitely fits in. I think new things have taken over for Jamba Juice. There's other smoothie versions, iterations. Some of that is represented by options at Starbucks, but other restaurant or other chains as well. But if you weren't going for a coffee run, you'd go for a smoothie run, and before you did whatever thing. Or it was something if you went to the gym, you'd get a smoothie after. So it could be a similar kind of thought, again, reinforcing the fact that Costco is effort. It's a lot of labor. You're tired after. You get your smoothie after, much like you would at the gym. In terms of like the fact that these things have endured, I think speaks to, again, this kind of nostalgia of you started having this, and people kept wanting it. It's affordable. None of the prices that they have are very, very expensive. So it's something that people just keep buying. I could also see this as a great, theoretically, I could envision people saying to their children, no, I'm not going to get you ice cream, but I'll get you this fruit smoothie because it's a healthier option, when in reality it's probably just mostly sugar. So there's a lot of psycho kind of thinking, psychological thinking I could see them doing. I also think a lot about how Costco builds so much of this into their internal infrastructure. They don't outsource this. They're not getting shipments from Cisco. They're doing this all in-house. And so they're building out these SOPs for, making their own hot dogs, for having their special buns, for whatever it is. And so they went through all that effort to put it in place. I would imagine it would be more cost effective just to keep it than to jettison it, unless it just had a full drop off, like a full, couldn't get that ingredient, or, full, we found out that strawberries were deadly and people just stopped buying them, full stop. I can only imagine that there's some business sense behind it as well.
Speaking of that, let's move on to the Costco ice cream sundaes. The flavored one seems to change in variation seasonally, but the other ones are just plain soft serve, and they are much cheaper than anywhere else for ice cream.
Yeah.
Now we're looking at this menu. Let's step back. We had a slice of pizza, we had a chicken bake, we had a calzone, we had a turkey and provolone sandwich, and then we had the hot dogs. With the exception of the hot dog, this is a very dairy-heavy menu, and they are following it up with ice cream. What is it about the American diet that relies or requests dairy so much? And part two of that question is, there has very clearly, in the last few years, been a major trend of people talking about their lactose intolerance on social media, and Costco clearly has not responded to that. Tell me all about that.
Yeah, Americans love their dairy. I think, there's so many foods that we associate with America as American, but I think one of the things that feels the most American to me is dairy in general. The dairy aisle feels very American, and not obviously exclusionarily, because other countries obviously and other cultures have dairy as well, but the fact that we embrace it in this kind of full spectrum. We'll have, dairy in all the different parts of a meal, and then dairy at the end as well, and ice cream. Whereas other cultures, I think, are better at balancing out when the dairy comes in. And yeah, so it's definitely ingrained in America. It's a huge part of the sales. I know that Costco, there's several items at Costco that I think are, the prices don't change that much, but they are kind of markers for kind of economic situations in our country broadly. And they're used, across the spectrum too. They're used in other grocery stores, but a gallon of milk is always kind of something that is kind of watched, because it's something that a lot of American households have, which I think is very telling, right? Like we're not tracking the price of pasta. We're not tracking the price, at least not as big, of green beans or anything like that maybe like everybody can eat. It's milk, and it's specifically cow's milk. And so I think there's that. I think Costco also has, is known for, you buy the 2-pack of a 2-gallon pack of milk, I think, at a time. I think you can get smaller, but I'm not certain. I think they're a milk forward company. So it makes sense that they would incorporate that into their menu when it's something that they already have on hand. I would be curious. The cheese definitely has, like any of the cheesy items, is almost assuredly going to have milk in it, because it's really hard to replicate vegan cheese at a cost-effective scale. Whereas the soft serve, and looking at the menu, it says ice cream. So I feel certain that it is dairy-based, because I think they would have to call it something else. But like other fast food restaurants, typically when they serve serve like this with all the different toppings, it is not a dairy-based product. Chick-fil-A, I think, is one of them. McDonald's. I think most of the other ones are not dairy-based. And they do that for a number of reasons, not only cost, but it is, I think the consumer is actually an afterthought in terms of it being an option for people who can't consume dairy, but it is like a side effect perk. But I think the fact that they say cream on here means that it has to be legally, has to be mostly dairy. But yeah, I think it's just telling of our American kind of fascination with dairy products, and the fact that we don't get tired of it at any stage of our meal.
Last item I'd like to look at is that double chocolate chunk cookie on the right hand side, which is very expensive compared to everything else on the menu, comparatively. Do note on there that it says served warm, all butter.
Mm-hmm.
Is there really I don't understand this. Maybe this is the real question I'm asking you that I don't understand. My best friend Alex is from Russia. He moved here in 1993. And when we met in the early 2000s, I would take him on road trips really into the country, because he had never left New York City too much. And so one of the places we went was in Henderson, Nevada. Okay. And we went to an Albertsons. And we're looking at the bakery aisle, and he picks up one of those sort of generic loaves of fake Italian bread or fake French bread, or whatever it is, at the Albies. And one of the employees comes up to him and says, "Would you like me to warm that up for you?" And we both kind of looked at each other, because it was such a foreign question to both of us. And in the same way I tell you that story, I see that the chocolate chunk cookie advertised here is advertised as served warm. What is it, or what are the origins in American food culture of wanting baked goods, or perceiving that baked goods are better or more desirable if they are warm?
Yeah, I think this comes down to, and that was a lovely story. I have never been asked about warming bread in a grocery store, so I also find that really intriguing. I think it comes down to this sense of, again, nostalgia for what we expect out of our American foodways. And what we expect and what we like to think of is that it's wholesome, and that it's homey, and it's like grandma would have made, even if we are the furthest from whatever grandma would have known. And I love that phrasing. I think Michael Pollan is the one who first said that, eat like your grandmother ate. I don't know how old his grandmother was. She was from a very different era than my grandmother. So every generation we have to add another like great to that phrase to figure out how far back we should actually be eating correctly. But one of the things I think that is like a very quick and easy way to simulate that kind of feeling, that kind of homemade, homey, wholesome, done with like it's fresh, um, is through the warming of baked goods or the warming of bread. And it's as if it just came out of the oven. It's as if, grandma just pulled out of sheet of cookies or mom just pulled out of sheet of cookies and is serving one fresh to you. And we see this too. I'm really curious too if you've experienced this. We see this specifically with cookies in a lot of places that it makes no sense. I don't know if this is like a unique thing to the South, but I have been in multiple funeral homes where they serve warm cookies and they pump out the smell, like they position where the cookies are being baked, and they have branded cookie ovens, little like toaster ovens, and so they're pulling the frozen dough out of the freezer in the little chunks, and they're placing them on there, presumably to feed people. It's like one of the offerings that they have is kind of like a service, but it's a branded cookie oven from this brand here in the States we have called Otis Spunkmeyer. That same brand of cookies, yeah, that same brand of cookies was in my high school, and I know that's like a common thing in schools across the nation. So you'd always smell this lovely smell of cookies. And at the funeral home, you smell these cookies. At the Costco, I don't know if they're Otis Spunkmeyer, but like you smell the cookies. And there's that kind of silly thing where realtors, when they're trying to sell a house, they bake cookies or they light a cookie scented candle. Say that again. I'm so sorry.
Yeah, I was saying I know about the psychology of the baking cookie smell to relax people for sure. And in a previous life, I was an expert at getting free stuff at the mall while waiting for my ex-wife to shop. So I used to go to David's Bridal every time we went to the mall and pretend that I was like with whatever group was getting fitted just to get a cup of free coffee, and then I would take that free coffee and I'd walk across from the mall. There was a car dealership, a Kia dealership, that had the little Otis Spunkmeyer oven right when you walked in, and I'd get my cookies from there, and I'd do like a circuit, and by the time I was done doing the circuit of free food and beverage, it was time to go home. So I know about that. Yeah, I didn't know about the funeral home one. That's a good one. But I guess that must be something to it. But I couldn't figure out like with the warm bread, which was sort of a standard thing they offer at Albertsons, because you can't smell it in the store. It's not like it's attracting people to the baked goods section. It was really confusing. So anyway.
I think it's also like a layer of. And I would imagine this extends to the bread as well. It's you can eat a cookie cold. You can eat a cookie room temperature. You wouldn't necessarily want to eat a hot dog room temperature. It's like understood that it's going to be heated. It's understood that the ice cream's going to be cold. The cookie's a toss-up. The cookie could be either way. But there's this gesture of I'm going to do the labor. Costco is going to do the labor of warming this cookie for you. And you're going to thank us by paying a little bit more than the other things, more than the hot dog. And
okay, I get the psychology now that we're talking it out, because my friend Lexi and I used to talk about this all the time in New York City bodegas.
Mm-hmm.
If you were a regular, if you tipped a lot, or if you were just like some hot girl that walked in off the street and you ordered a cup of tea, invariably the guy working there would be, I put an extra tea bag in there for you.
Yes. Yeah.
It would be like, why? It's disgusting.
Too much tea. But the gesture
but it's the
nice.
Same gesture. So that's making sense to me now. It's the same logic of the labor. Okay. KC, this was a very informative conversation. This was wonderful. Thank you so much for sharing your knowledge and your time with all of us. I'm going to have links to Casey's website and her Substack below. I sincerely encourage all of you to check them out. I'll see you guys again next week. Thanks, Casey. Thanks, everybody.